Good morning, Dom. How are you doing today?
I'm doing great, Arrow. How you doing?
Fantastic. Dude, this had to have been one of the greatest projects you've ever been on because I'm from Montana. We grow up in Montana studying the wild, wild West. And I'm going to tell you something. You've made me a stronger student because of the real Wild West.
Oh, that's wonderful. I'm so glad to hear that you found something new to put in the hopper.
Why don't we know the stories? I mean, you know, I came from the country of Wild Bill Hitchcock and we had Calamity Jane and, I mean, the Wild West of Montana.
Yeah, well, you know, it's one of those things that over time, the history of the West has sort of been bottlenecked in a sort of way that if you don't know, you don't know, and the stories may not ever come up. And I think now with the real Wild West, there are some of those stories that can now be pushed into the forefront.
You know, one of the things that listeners need to understand about the real Wild West, which is on Curiosity Stream, is that you're not challenging history, you're adding to history.
That's correct. And, there's so much that can be added to make a much more full and clear and diverse story. That's one of the things that's just so beautiful about the series is that you can take the time and you can compare and contrast the things that you know already with the new information that you're finding, which again isn't necessarily newer information, but it's actually information that's been there the whole time.
For the everyday average person, where does the Wild West really begin? Is it in St. Louis, moving out to the West Coast? Where was the actual placement of the Wild West?
Well, in the course of this show, it begins just west of the Mississippi, and then it shows the way that it evolves from the Louisiana Purchase, which is where you then begin to have that sort of history that goes from St. Louis going west, and then also the different journeys on the trails that opened up new parts of the West for American settlement.
Yeah, that Oregon Trail. I mean, it is so planted inside my heart because that was one of the things that we were forced to learn in the state of Montana because it went right through our territory.
Absolutely, and even in the documentaries, there's also talk of the Goodnight Loving Trail, the Chisholm Trail.
Yeah,
and it gets into all the nitty gritty of a lot of it, and there's some really great visuals as well, so that you can really get a sense of the evolution of the United States during that time, because there was a lot of movement happening. I mean, it was the core of discovery, and then after that you had the Mexican-American War, and the Mexican-American War goes almost straight into the Civil War, and then you go straight past the Civil War into the settling of the West, and going into the early 1900s. I mean, it's quite a wild ride of seeing how quickly all of it happened.
Do you get into the area of 1864 where it was illegal to be a Native American in the state of Colorado?
It does get into the Removal Act and some of the different Plains Wars that had gone on, and that's one of the sad truths of the history, right. that we weren't that great to the Native American people, and that's one of the things that is talked about quite a bit in the documentary as well.
Dom, how did you stay strong? And the reason why I bring that up is because I barely made it through the book, Bury My Heart at Wounded Knee. And I know that what life was like in the Wild West because it's such a part of my heart. But how did you personally stay strong the more and more you dug into history?
Well, I mean, the thing, you just have to keep moving straight forward into it and try anything you can to make sure that you don't let what happened in the past distract you from the story that you're trying to tell. And that's one of the things that's really was very powerful about this project, was being able to go past some of the hardships and to be able to just tell the full, complete story. And I mean, it's a lot of information. So, I mean, it's not for the faint of heart.
Yeah. I'm proud of the fact that you've included everyone, because people don't understand that African-American men and women, as well as Hispanics, were a part of the shaping of this nation, and we need to find respect in their stories.
Without a doubt, and to be able to really coalesce this whole story into something that where you can understand that the southwestern part of the country was part of Mexico, and to see how that became a part of the Americas, and also to see how it changed hands from Mexico to the series of families in the Republic to then becoming the part of the United States. It's something that we have to contend with so that we can then understand, where we move forward from there.
In a really weird way, do you feel like you're a pioneer by opening up this conversation?
Well, I feel like I do the best I can with it, and I think that with this documentary, there is a sort of a pioneer spirit where, just like Manifest Destiny way in the past, there's a destiny that this documentary has that is wanting to open the doors and to really help strengthen and add to the story to make a more powerful, positive story of the West.
Well, I got to be honest with you here, Don. I believe that today's Wild West is wilder than it had to have been back in the 1800s or even the 1700s, because I've never seen more people so deadly than today versus then. Or am I wrong?
People are having large transitions of the American identity, which is what was happening in the West at the same time. So I can see some comparisons that you could bring to it, but that people weren't timid in the Old West. There was a lot of violence that went on.
I was doing some research today. The average age of a person in 1860 was 39 years old. Did you see that in your research? How people didn't really grow into their 70s and 80s?
Yeah, there were a lot of different things that were working against them. Of course, there was a lot of violence in the West, but there was also a lot of hunger and famine, and there was a lot of disease that was a part of that westward migration out to the Western Plains. And so, there was a lot of things that were going against people at that time.
Was the big rush the gold rush in California? Even Montana had gold rushes, but not as big as California. Yeah,
absolutely, and that was something else. But people were so fixated on getting out there and getting out to where the gold was. They didn't care. They wanted to go out there and do what they needed to do.
Yeah. How much focus is put on Lewis and Clark? Because, the only place where Lewis and Clark, the physical evidence outside of handwriting, is Pompey's Pillar just outside of Billings, Montana. because he actually wrote into the sandstone.
Well, that's one of the beautiful things. They have a nice section on Lewis and Clark, and Clark's servant York, as well as Sacagawea. They have a whole section that's talking about all of their contributions to the Corps of Discovery. So there is a really nice section on Lewis and Clark.
The myth versus the reality. How could you physically see the difference between the two, or did you have to dig in even deeper to find out if it was a myth?
Well, you have to dig in deeper because, of course, with every myth, there's a little nugget of truth that's within it. So there is quite a bit of truth that's within the story that's been told. But when you go into the details, that's when you start finding the interesting new pieces of information that you might find. And it sort of opens the narrative just a little bit farther when you start to find all of the minute details that define some of these bigger events in history.
Now, being connected to American music like you are, what was it like to be a part of this project? Because in reality, this whole entire documentary, isn't it a very long song in your heart?
Yeah, well, having done my album Black Cowboys several years back, this project in many ways took a lot of the things that I had researched when I was putting together the Black Cowboys album, and it sort of dovetailed right into a beautiful documentary film, because it really opens up this story of the West, that when it comes to the Black Cowboys of the West, they were the ones that inherited this Western history and Western culture that were out there, especially during the post-emancipation period. Mm-hmm. And so that was something that documentary brought around home for me.
Wow. I'm so proud of you on this, and I cannot wait for the continuation of this, because I just know somewhere in your heart there's going to be something that's just going to continue growing and keeping the conversation going.
Oh, thank you, Arrow. I appreciate that. Yeah, I feel so inspired by this documentary. I'm not sure what it's going to be next, but I know it's going to be something big.
Well, please come back to this show anytime in the future. The door is always going to be open for you.
All right. Well, thank you so much.
Will you be brilliant today, sir?
All right. Appreciate that.